Hi, my name's Stewart Lynch, and this is the second in a two-part video series where I show you how you can add an in-app purchase subscription to your SwiftUI app using Glassfy, a brilliant third-party SDK. In this video, we'll build a paywall for our app so your users can make that purchase to unlock the full features of your app. We'll test the purchase and restore a past purchase. We'll be using a Sandboxed user on a real device. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. Well, now that our app has been tested and we know that the Glassfy and AppStore Connect are communicating, we can build our UI that will allow the user who currently only has basic access to get full access. We currently have a property in the view model that is a published property that's initialized as basic. When the class is initialized, we should check to see if the full product has already been purchased. So what we want to do is to check with Glassfy and AppStore Connect to see if the user has already made that full purchase and set the value of our enum to full if he has. In PurchaseManager, we can create another function, and I'm going to call it hasPurchased. It too will use an asynchronous version of our Glassfy function and will be returning a Boolean value. It'll be true if we've purchased and false if not, or if there was an error retrieving the information. So we can do this in a do-catch block. And in the catch, we'll do the same thing as before by printing out the error's localized description. But this time, because we're returning a Boolean, we'll return false. Now what we want to do is to retrieve the permission which we set up in Glassfy. So we can say let permission equal and try and await for what is returned from the Glassfy permission function. Now the specific permission that we're looking for is the one called full. And we can check to see if it's valid. Full is the level.full's raw value. And if it's true, we return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. So now we can create a function in our view model that will check to see if we've purchased. So let's call this checkPurchase. Now since it needs to call an asynchronous function in PurchaseManager, we can create an asynchronous task. Now if we await the result of PurchaseManager's shared hasPurchased, and if it's true, we can set the level to full, else we'll set it to basic, which would have been the default anyway. Now this is going to update our UI, and it's a background task, and UI updates have to happen in the main queue. So I'll need to assign this entire view model, which is an observable object, as a main actor, so that those updates will happen on the main queue. We'll eventually be calling this function when our content view loads, but first let's create our settings view where we can display our paywall. So within our views folder, create a new SwiftUI file and call it settings view. Import Glassfy so that we can access the properties. And then add two properties. One will be a private state property that is a SKU, which is an optional Glassfy SKU. And also, I'm going to pass into here our current level, so let's create that as a binding. And then I'll add a constant of basic to fix the preview. Now content view needs some way to trigger a modal sheet to present our settings view. So return to content view now and create a new state property called show settings and initialize it as false. I'm going to add a toolbar so that we can add a button on our navigation bar. We'll create a toolbar item where the placement is the navigation bar trailing. And in the closure, I can create a button where the label is a system image named gearshape.fill. And then to make the target a little bit larger, I'll set the font size to a title 3. And then for the action, we'll simply toggle that show settings Boolean property. Next, then I can add a sheet function that will be initiated by the show settings Boolean value. And then I'll present the settings view, passing in that current level as the binding. And that level is in our view model, the viewModel.level. Now I'm designing this in SwiftUI, and having the preview display the UI is problematic because we can't simulate that call to our SDK right now. So this is what I want to display if the user hasn't made the purchase. That's a pretty straightforward UI, so I think I can do that without having to show or test it. If the purchase has been made, we'll display only the Glassfy image with a message above it that will display a text view indicating the full access has already been granted. So first, I'll embed the text view in a navigation view and a VStack. I'm going to add a navigation title of settings. And then I'll set the navigation bar title display mode to inline. Next, I'm going to add a toolbar and then a toolbar item with a placement of navigation bar trailing. And then for the closure, I'll just create a button with a text view of close. And I'll set the button style to bordered. When the view appears, we can create an asynchronous task that will await the PurchaseManager shared getProducts function and assign it to our SKU property. I like to add a manual way to dismiss this modal sheet, and that's why I created that close button. So let me create an environment variable called dismiss. And then for the button action, I can call the dismiss function. So now I can replace that hello world text view with our conditional design. First, if the level is already full, it means that the check that we initiated has returned true and that the full level has already been granted. We can just display the text view saying you have full access. I'll give it a larger font of title 3 and add some padding. If it didn't indicate that the purchase had already been made, then we'll have to check to make sure that we have a SKU. Remember, we created it as an optional. So if let SKU is equal to SKU, we can create a text view saying you are currently only seeing 50% of the emojis in any category. Upgrade to the full version to see them all. I can set the font to a larger title of title 3. And then add some padding. Then we can create two buttons, one to allow them to purchase and one that will allow them to restore the purchase if for some reason the app doesn't know about it or that they've changed Apple ID since launching on the phone. We'll test that out later. We'll leave the actions alone for now. For the purchase button, we'll create a button that for the label will use information from the returned SKU. So we'll create a VStack with two text elements. The first will display the SKU.product.localized description. And the second will display the SKU.product.price. And then we can add some padding and then set the button style to bordered prominent. We'll create that second button with a label that is simply just going to say Restore Purchases and set the button style to simply just bordered. It's kind of a secondary button. Now, if we don't get a SKU, which should be never, we should say something like, something went wrong. Try again later. Then we can set the font to Title 3 and add some padding. And then finally, just to complete this screen so that it's not a lot of white space, I'll add an image, and I'm just going to use the same image that I used for the launch screen. And apply some padding. And then a spacer to push everything up to the top. We can still test this out in the simulator now, at least to see what it looks like for a basic case, because we've not yet purchased, so we should be able to see that and reflect it in the UI. So when I launch the app, it goes to check to see if we have a SKU, and we do because we can see it in the console. I can tap on the settings button now, and up comes that nice view asking me to purchase. Now the one issue I have is that the price isn't showing as currency. It's just a double showing the US amount. Well, let's fix that. Outside of the body, create a function called localized price that returns a string. This could also be a computed property. Now, if we have a SKU, we can create a number formatter. Then we can set the formatter's number style to currency. And with that, we can then return the formatter's string from our SKU's product price. And if there wasn't a SKU, we'll just return an empty string. We'll also need to unwrap that conversion. Now we can replace that price text with the localized price and test it out again. That's better. All we have to do now is to create the functions for our two buttons, one for the purchase and one for the restore, and then test it on a real device. First, the purchase button. Open PurchaseManager and create a purchase function for the SKU that returns true if successful and false if not. And we'll again be calling a Glassfy asynchronous function, so it needs to be async. Create a do-catch block. This is going to be familiar. We'll do this every time. And as before, print the error and return false if we catch an error. And we can retrieve the transaction by trying and awaiting the Glassfy purchase function. And that requires that we pass in the SKU. Now, if the transaction permission for our full product, which is the level.full.raw value, is valid, is true, as a result of that transaction, we can return true. Else, we'll return false. Now, I could have probably just simplified this as a single line, but sometimes I like to extend things so that it reads better. Now let's create a restore purchase function that will return true if the user has purchased and false if not. This again will be an asynchronous function. So we'll create a doCatch block and again print the error if it catches one and return false. In the do block, let's see what the Glassfy restore async function returns. We see that it returns a Glassfy permission, which we already have done above in the hasPurchase function. So I can simply just copy that code from there and paste it here. And we carry on the same way. I can return to the settings view now and add the actions to the two buttons that will asynchronously await the return of the Boolean value from the Purchase Manager. So for the Purchase button, we'll need to create a task unit of work. And then we can await the result from Purchase Manager's shared purchase function, passing in the SKU. And if it's true, we'll set the level to full. Remember, if it was false, we're already set at basic. For the restore button, we'll do a similar thing, but we'll just call the restore function instead. In both cases, if return value is true, the view model's level property is updated to full, and the view will change to display the full purchase message instead of the two buttons. The user would then have full access. Now we need to test a purchase, but unfortunately you can't do that from a simulator. So before you test, you should set up a Sandboxed user in AppStore Connect. And you can do that by going to the Users and Access tab. And then at the bottom, you can click on Testers. And then add another Sandbox account. And this is the account that you're going to be using to test on a real device. So what we'll need to do first before we test a purchase though is to make sure that when our app presents our content view, it checks to see if the purchase has already been made and has already set our level to full. So let's go to Content View where the view appears, and here we'll call the view model's check purchase function. Next, I'm going to switch over to my test phone and I'm going to run the app on it. I've already authenticated on this phone as that test account. When the app first launches, I can tap on the picker button and I can see that the last object in the object emoji is the one that's the yen banknote. There's a limited number of emojis available to me. I'm only seeing 50% of them. If I tap on the settings button, it tells me that I'm only seeing 50% of the emojis. My phone is localized to Canada, so now I see that localized Canadian price. If I tap on the purchase button, up comes the purchase screen for that Sandboxed user, and you see here that it's the T-user account. If I tap on subscribe, it should say purchase, no idea why it says subscribe. That's not a Glassfy issue. I'm asked to enter a password, and this is the Sandbox thing. And when I do, the transaction is processed. Soon, I get notification that the purchase was successful. And then the screen changes to display that I now have full access. If I return to the home screen and pick another emoji in this category, I see that I now have lots more to choose from. And if I pick the last one, it's that identification card. It seems to be working. Tapping on settings indicates that I still have access. What if I stop and run again? If I tap on the Settings button, I'm told that it knows that I have purchased. If I change to a different category, I have full access to all the emojis. Now there's a couple of things here that we still need to do. You may have noticed now that I'm getting a warning in my content view. And that's because things changed in 5.6 with respect to main actor. And we added that to our view model. And the suggested solution is to provide no default value to the property and set its value in an initializer instead. So we can remove the default initialization here and just specify that the view model is of type view model. Then we create an initializer, and because view model is a state object, we will use self._viewModel, and then we can instantiate it as a state object whose wrapped value is an instance of the viewModel class. I'm hoping they're going to remove this requirement in a later update of Swift. So let's see if that's been resolved now by running our app. We can select an emoji, which updates our UI, and if we stop and return to Xcode, we no longer have that warning. Now there's one more thing we need to check, and that's the Restore button. Now there may be occasions when your phone does not recognize the purchase on launch. And this could happen, for example, if you've switched accounts when you open the app and the purchase is no longer valid and you only have 50% of the emojis. Then you switch back to that valid ID, but because your app is still loaded, it doesn't check again. So you're going to have to ask to restore the purchase. I can simulate that simply by commenting out that first check when the app runs, so it no longer knows if I've made that subscription purchase. Now, when I launch the app, I can go to the settings screen and it shows that it has not recognized that purchase. But this time, instead of purchasing, because I know this user, T user, has already purchased, I'll just tap Restore. So Glassfy checks with AppStore Connect if the purchase has been made and restores the full access. Wasn't that easy? I now see that I have access to all of the emojis. And they're here for all sets. Make sure you remove that comment now then. Now during the creation of this video, I tested out more than one purchase. You've just seen one, but let me log back into my Glassfy account now and check my app out. I don't see any information here on my dashboard because I've not made any real purchases. Once your app goes live, this information will be updated with your stats. If I scroll down, however, you'll see all of the transactions that I've tested while creating this video. And what's great about testing in the sandbox is that you can either go to AppStore Connect and delete previous purchases from the user so that you can try and try again. Or after a short period of time, subscriptions expire well before that 1 month period. We're talking about a matter of hours. And then you can test that experience when that subscription expires. So I hope you see how easy it's been to create in-app purchase subscriptions in your SwiftUI app using Glassfy. Be sure to go to the Glassfy website and create your own account and start testing out Glassfy for your next in-app subscription purchase. Thanks for watching.